Hello, my name is Vince Ryan, the elected county attorney for Harris County, Texas. An important part of my job is to enforce the civil laws of the state of Texas, including the election code. An equally important task is the county's lawyer is assisting other county officials and county government to do their jobs. Our voter registrar is our tax assessor collector, Ann Harris Bennett. Her office has the daunting task of registering every eligible citizen who is qualified to vote and putting their names in the voter rolls. We now have more than 2,300,000 people on the rolls, more than ever in a non-presidential election year. But this is not enough because we know that there are hundreds of thousands of people in Harris County who could vote if they were only registered to vote. The deadline for voter registration for the November general election is Tuesday, October 9th. There are many people, groups, and organizations who are actively working to register voters. Many are sponsors of today's program, and I thank them for all this program and their efforts will result in. I want to extend a special thank you to the Houston Bar Association for sponsoring a program called Now You Are 18. Volunteer lawyers will be explaining to 18-year-olds and soon-to-be 18-year-olds the rights and duties of citizenship that come with age, including the privilege of voting. Also, my office is working with the district attorney's office and the tax assessor collector voter registrar's office to inform all the schools in Harris County, both public and private, of the duty of every high school principal to assist in registering their students to vote as required by the Texas Election Code. Thank you for being here today and participating in this program.
Many of you know the managing attorney of public law, Doug Ray. Let me just tell you, Doug Ray is a lawyer's lawyer, and when you need to know the law and you got any kind of problems, we all end up saying, hey Doug, what's the law? And so here he is to tell you everything you ever wanted to know about the Texas Election Code and voter registration. Doug Ray.
Hi, how you doing? And I do have a long, boring PowerPoint, but I'm going to try and minimize references to it. I'm not going to stand here and read the whole thing to you. Voter registration law is kind of complicated because there are federal requirements and there are state requirements. You just heard some of the state requirements up there, the ones that are important to you if you're serving as a volunteer deputy voter registrar. The federal requirements are imposed by what's known as the National Voter Registration Act. It was passed in 1993, and it's more commonly known as the Motor Voter Act. And the reason why is that the federal law requires that all states that engage in advanced voter registration, is this thing working? They have to have certain requirements in their voter registration system. So the reason why I said those that engage in advanced voter registration is, believe it or not, there are states that don't have any voter registration at all. And there are states that say that you can register and vote on the same day voter registration. So there are 6 of these states. First time I ever became familiar with this concept when I was young and I was in the Air Force, and they stationed me in North Dakota. And I was sitting in my apartment one day, and this guy comes and knocks on the door. And he says, I would like you to vote for me for city council. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm not registered to vote here. And he says, you don't have to be registered. We don't have voter registration here in North Dakota. What you got to remember about North Dakota at the time, and it's probably still true mostly today, is that there not very many people live there. I think they all know each other personally. There's like 700,000 people in the entire state. Not the least populated state, but just to put it in perspective, there are about 4.7 million people live here in Harris County. There are 25 states that have fewer people living in than Harris County, Texas. Just to put it in perspective. Just in case you wondered why the freeways were so busy. Take the whole state of Montana and mash them into one place and you wouldn't have more people than live in one commissioner precinct here. So, they don't have voter registration. They have other methods of keeping track of who might be a registered, eligible to vote and who would not. And when you show up to vote, you have to swear that you're a resident of the state and all that, but it's not a voter registration system. There are 5 other states that you don't have to register ahead of time. You can just register at the time that you go to vote. And they maintain the registration roll on that basis. And believe it or not, that's been kind of the basis of controversy because there's been allegations, good grief, there's been allegations that, people send buses from New Hampshire over to Massachusetts, pick up a bunch of people and bring them across the border, and they register and vote in the New Hampshire election. And once again, New Hampshire is such a small state that probably everybody does know each other personally there, so I have a hard time believing that they could really get away with that. But that was the allegation. So, but if you do have an advanced voter registration system, you are, subject to the motor voter law, the National Voter Registration Act, then, isn't she kind? We just have a wonderful voter registrar over here. You have to have 3 distinct methods of voter registration available. First, the Motor Vehicle Driver's License Bureau of the state has to also offer voter registration. So when you go to apply for a driver's license, they have to give you an opportunity to register to vote at the same time. This has caused some controversy in Texas. I'll get into that in a minute. So if you go to the Driver's License Bureau, one of the things that you're going to be asked to do is, do you want to register to vote? Maybe all of you have experienced this. They always ask you, do you want to register to vote? It's pursuant to the motor voter law, the NVRA, that they are required to do that. The second thing is that they have to have a system whereby you can apply for voter registration by mail. And in fact, there's a federal registration form that they require you to use or to offer in order for people to register by mail. Now, besides you folks handing out your registration certificates for people to fill out as volunteer deputy registrars, there are several other ways that people can get the registration certificate to mail in. One is that they can go to the voter registrar's webpage, which is hctax.net, and there is a link to give you a voter registration form. The voter must download that, print it, mail it with a signature on it, completely filled out, to the address provided. Must be mailed in, must be received by the proper time. The second way you can do it is you can go to votetexas.gov, which is a web page that is maintained by the Secretary of State's office. There's a voter registration application form that you can download, print, sign, and mail in there. Now, one of the questions that always comes up when I start talking about this is, why don't they just have like an online form that you can just fill out and punch a button and then you register? Well, because there's a concern that that would be subject to a lot of fraud. Fraud. Somebody would, fill out phony registration forms and send them in. But if you're already registered to vote, in this state, you can go to votetexas.gov and update your information if you move. You can do that completely online, except in one circumstance, and I'll get to that in a little while. The third thing that the NVRA requires is that there be voter registration agencies in the state. The state must designate what agencies those are, and they include places where you can receive public assistance. So the state, our state, Texas, has gone and designated a bunch of places that are the places that you would get these registration services. Now, these include the Texas Health and Human Services Commission offices, Texas Department of Aging and Disability Services, the Texas Department of Assistive and Rehabilitative Services, the Texas Department of State Health Services, and any other agency or program as designated by the Secretary of State to be a place where you can vote. Now, Texas has designated all these places, the Driver's License Bureau, and all public libraries. I think I see our librarian here. So you're a volunteer, or you're a voter registration agency. But the Secretary of State has not designated any additional agencies beyond the ones that are in the statute. So those are the agencies. If you go seek services at one of those agencies, they're required to provide to you an opportunity to vote. So if you've ever applied for Medicaid or anything like that, one of the forms, you're sitting right here. No wonder I couldn't see her. She's beneath my vision. One of the things that they'll send you, in addition to all the application forms, is a registration, voter registration application, which you can fill out and send in. So, if you go down to the Driver's License Bureau, they'll ask you if you can, you want to register to vote. One of the things the Driver's License Bureau does is periodically you have to renew your license. And when you go down to the office to renew your license, they'll ask you if you want to register to vote. But one of the things that the Driver's License Bureau in Texas does is they don't require you to come into the office to renew your license every single time. It's like every other time. So you get your 4 years license, your 4 years is up, you get something in the mail that says you can go online. You're eligible to go online and renew your license by paying your fee online. And they'll send you a brand new license with that great old picture that you took 4 years ago. And after about 8 years, you look pretty good compared to the way you look when you look in the mirror. There was a lawsuit that was filed just a few years ago, and recently, a federal judge down in San Antonio said that there's a problem with the way that voter registration application material is handled by the Department of Public Safety when people are renewing their driver's license. And the problem is this: if you go into the office and say, I want to renew my license, they'll hand you an application form and say you want to register to vote. Okay? But if you already have your driver's license and you go online, if you're one of those people eligible to renew online, what they'll do is they'll say, if you want to renew your registration or you want to register to vote, you can click on this handy link and go over to votetexas.gov and download a form to print it off and sign it and mail it in. In other words, they don't actually offer you an opportunity to update or register to vote if you're renewing online. And the federal judge said that's a problem. This does not comply with the NVRA. So he actually entered an order requiring that the Department of Public Safety institute a system where people can register online when they're updating their driver's license information online. And the Fifth Circuit has stayed that order. They're considering what to do, because there is no online registration in Texas, except for in that circumstance, if that were implemented. You can't go online and just register to vote online. So we'll see what happens. It's a case called Stringer versus Pablos is the name of it. Pablos. Can anybody tell me who Pablos is, by the way? He's the Texas Secretary of State. Yeah, Miss Bennett, she knew. Now, the NVRA does have a system whereby the voter registration roll is maintained in an efficient manner. Now, there's been a lot of controversy over the last few years of states endeavoring to try to, clean up their rolls, to make sure that only people that are registered to vote are on that roll, and the people that shouldn't be registered to vote are off the roll. They do this through several different means. You may recall that the trainer told you that there was a bunch of different ways that you could be ineligible to vote. You could be a convicted felon. You could be adjudicated incompetent. You could have a lot of different things. Well, sometimes those things happen after you already registered to vote. In other words, they don't just consider it at the time you file your application. You may file your application today, and you may be, you may have a complete clean criminal history. The next day they arrest you, send you off to the pokey, convict you of a crime, and throw you in prison. But you're already registered to vote. There is a system whereby they keep track of who gets convicted of felonies, and that is transmitted to the Secretary of State, who compiles periodic reports and has the names of those folks removed from the roll. The same thing is true of people who are adjudicated as incompetent. That information is periodically compiled, is compared with the voter registration roll, and those people's registration is canceled. The most common way, though, is through what's known as the confirmation process. And there's been a lot of controversy about the confirmation process lately. And I know this personally because last week, Ms. Bennett and I got involved in this controversy. And it had to do with the fact that a challenge was filed by an individual in the county here, saying that there were folks that were on the registration roll who were registered at addresses that were not their residence. So the confirmation process is a way that you can, under federal law, clean up the rolls, so to speak. If the registrar receives information that indicates that the registration address of the person registered is not their resident address, they can send what's known as a confirmation notice. A confirmation notice basically asks you to either update your information or confirm that the information that we already have is correct. So that's what it's there for. If you do not respond to such a notice, if you receive one, then you're put on what's known as the suspense list. The suspense list is not a very well named list because you're not technically suspended from anything. What it means is that they have information in their records that indicate you may not live at the address that you're registered at. And before you can vote, you have to confirm that address. You can confirm it through all these means that have been made available up here. You can say, send in a updated voter registration list. You can write a letter to the voter registrar. Some of the other things you can do, however, is that you can go on, well, actually, you can't go on votetexas.gov. If you're on the suspension list, believe it or not, and this has been a big bugaboo for my pal JR in the back of the room there. If you're on the suspension list, you can't go on on votetexas.gov and update your voter registration information. You can only download a new form, sign the form, and send it in. And it seems to me like that of all the people in Texas who need to be able to have an easy way to update their voter registration information, it should be the people on the suspense list. Be that as it may. If you get put on the suspense list, what that means is that when you go to vote, you'll be required to fill out what's known as a statement of residence. It's a simple form that's used at the time you vote that confirms that you do live at the residence that you're registered, or to correct the information that's on your registration. And I think somebody in here asked a question, what happens if you walk into the voter booth and you say, oh yeah, I moved from this address to another address? What it provides is, if you're at the precinct where you are registered, or were originally registered, you can fill out a statement of residence to correct your registration as long as you still live in the same county, and you can go ahead and vote right there, right then, regular ballot. And that statement of residence will then act as an update of your voter registration information. So that is what a statement of residence is. That's how it operates. And if you're on the suspense list and you walk in to vote and you fill out a statement of residence, you're updated and you'll be taken off the suspense list. Now, one of the things you can do, if you go to hctax.net, which is the voter registrar's website, you can go there and check on your voter registration information. You can find out if you actually are on the voter registration list, what precinct you vote in, and also whether you're on the suspense list. If you're on the suspense list, it'll show that. During this most recent election, one of the folks in the office came to my office and said, I'm very worried because my house flooded, and we've been living someplace else. We haven't been able to move back into our home, and I haven't changed my registration, but I didn't get a new card. I didn't get the new card. And I said, well, there's a good reason for that. The card that they send out every 2 years is non-forwardable. If they send it to your old address, which is where the place has been flooded, not to where you're living now, it'll just bounce back and you'll be put on the suspense list. And I went on, checked her registration. It did show she was on the suspense list, and I said, you can go downstairs, because it was the time of early voting. We're actually voting in this very room. I said, just go downstairs. Tell them that you didn't get your updated card, that you want to fill out the statement of residence, affirming that the residence that you're intending to return to is in fact your residence, and they'll be able to vote. And she came back 10 minutes later, happy as anything, had voted, and everything was fixed. The National Voter Registration Act does have a private right of action. So if you have a client and they've come to you and they said they've been messing with me as far as my voter registration is concerned, look into the National Voter Registration Act requirements see if there's some violation of the terms that's affecting them negatively. If there is, you can bring a private cause of action. It does provide for attorney's fees if you win, believe it or not. The Department of Justice can also bring an action under the NBRA. And of course, there are also criminal penalties, federal criminal penalties, but there are criminal penalties. Somebody that willfully and knowingly violates the act can be held responsible criminally. So, yes, sir.
Would that include people who put you on the suspense list without reasonable cause? If somebody says, if you live somewhere and somebody says, I don't think he lives there, get you on the suspense list and you lose your right to.
Potentially, potentially. It's a good question. It's something that we'll have to consider. Yes, sir.
And I heard, my nephew told me that he had a person who could not vote because it was a suspension list due to the fact that he did not show up for jury duty.
Oh, well, there's another question. The question is, somebody had been taken off the registration list because they had not shown up for jury duty.
Suspension list.
Okay. Here's the problem, the way I understand it. When you are sent your jury notification, one of the things it asks you is whether or not you're qualified to be a juror. So, some people think it's pretty cute to get out of jury duty to check the mark that say, I'm not eligible for jury duty because I'm not a citizen of the United States. And they send that in. And the trouble is that the district clerk compiles this information, supplies it to the district attorney's office, and also the Secretary of State's office. And that acts as a method by which that person's voter registration is canceled on the basis that they're not a citizen of the United States. Now, merely not showing up for jury duty, I don't know if that's actually a basis for the being put on the suspense list. If that, in fact, happened, what I just described, that would be a reason for somebody's voter registration to be canceled. So that's a provision, another way that you can you have your voter registration canceled. Yes, Chris?
Well, they don't just get flat out canceled, they get a letter, and they get 30 days to respond, then they can.
Well, you're getting ahead of me. Chris German's in the back of the room lecturing me about the law. Okay, let me get into, I was going to talk about cancellation in a little while, and I can talk about it right now. Cancellation, how does it work? Basically, there are several different ways that your voter registration can be canceled. If we have information that you have died, if you've been convicted of a felony, if you've been found adjudicated having an incapacity, if there's some other information calling into question your qualifications to be a voter, the voter registrar is informed of that. They send out what's known as a cancellation notice. A cancellation notice is a forwardable piece of mail sent to your voter registration address. It gives you 30 days to respond to the notice of cancellation. If you do not respond to the cancellation, based on the information that we have, your voter registration can be canceled. However, you do have an opportunity to have a hearing or to respond by supplying whatever information is necessary to confirm that you are an eligible voter. For example, if we send out a letter that says, we have received information that you're not a citizen of the United States, you have 30 days to respond with evidence that you are in fact a citizen of the United States. If we send one out that says, we think you're dead, well, then you have 30 days to, supply evidence that you are in fact alive. If we send one out that says, we have received information that you have been adjudicated a felon, then you have 30 days to come in and show that you are in fact not a convicted felon. Okay? Now, this has actually been one of the stickiness points I think that we've had, because the information we get as to who is a convicted felon and when they're convicted and whether they're still under supervision by the state is not always very accurate. That's what we discovered, because people show up and say, yeah, I was convicted of a felony, but that was 20 years ago, and I've been off probation all this time, and I don't understand why you're throwing me off the voter registration list now. And we check it out, and they are in fact right. The conviction is very old. It's not up to date. It doesn't render them ineligible to vote. But that's the information that the voter registrar received. And the confirmation notice, if it's a challenge upon residency, is different. If we get information that there's a problem with your residency, then what we do is we send out the confirmation notice, the thing I was just describing a while ago. What's the most common way that we get that information? It's when we send out the new round of voter registration cards, which we do every 2 years. We send them out to everybody. Everybody gets a new card every 2 years. This card is non-forwardable. If it cannot be delivered to you at the address that you're registered to vote at, it is automatically returned to the voter registrar's office. And unfortunately, there's lots of reasons for this, one of which people have moved, but sometimes when people fill out their voter registration information, and all of you as deputy voter registrars should make sure that this is accurate when people are filling out forms for you, they live in an apartment building and they don't indicate which apartment they live in. This is the most common reason why we have a problem here. It bounces back because the mailman gets, 800 cards to deliver to this address. It's an apartment building, and it doesn't specify which apartment any of those people live in. So always ask, do you have an apartment number? Make sure that apartment number is filled in. So when it goes into the record, it'll be deliverable to a specific apartment, and it won't bounce back to the voter registrar's office. But if we get that card back, then they send out a confirmation notice. A confirmation notice, unlike the card, can be forwardable. It has to go by forwardable mail. So it has to be mail that can be advanced to wherever the person may have moved to. And what the confirmation notice asks is, do you still live at this address? If so, please confirm that to us. If you have moved, please update your information. If you do not respond to a confirmation notice, I think I said this before, then you go on your suspense list. You can stay on that suspense list through 2 federal election cycles. If you don't update your information, if you don't go in to vote and fill out an SOR during that 2-year period of time, after 2 federal election cycles, for example, 2018 is a federal election cycle, 2020 is a federal election cycle. If you received a confirmation notice today, you would have until after the 2020 election to come and update your information, either by voting and filling out an SOR or updating in the various ways that you can update. If you don't do so, if they don't hear from you during that period of time, they can assume that you're no longer a resident and no longer wish to be registered to vote there, and they can remove your name from the list. If a state engages in a mass attempt to purge the roll, through reviewing for any of these bases for registered voters, through the confirmation process for addresses, or through any of the other means. If they engage in such a system, they have to complete those programs at least 90 days before a federal election or a primary. So, if, for example, we started one of these today, it's too close to the election. Election's only 68 days away, I think, and that would violate the NRA or NVRA. All right. Texas law. Texas law is found basically in chapters 11 through 20 of the Texas Election Code. So if you have questions that have to do with voter registration, it's probably found in one of those 10 chapters. That list that I came up with a while ago that was talking about where the voter registration agencies, that's found in chapter 20 of the Texas Election Code. And each one of these sections deals with one of those basic things. Now, I think we went over sufficiently during the training what the voter qualifications are in Texas, so I'll skip that. Who is the voter registrar in Texas? The tax collector. The tax collector. Did any of you ever sit around and think, why would they designate the tax collector as the voter registrar? It's because before 1965, to register to vote, you had to pay a tax. You had to pay a poll tax.
Why was that, Doug?
Raise revenue? I don't know. I think we all know why. But see, the basic thing is that is traditionally why the voter registration office is found in the tax office. Texas law says that you can transfer it to the county clerk's office instead, or you can appoint an election administrator to have that function. Actually, election administrators are very common in Texas. Of the 11 largest counties in Texas, 9 of them have an election administrator, a professional person who's hired. He's supposed to be nonpartisan. In fact, he's supposed to be extremely nonpartisan. He's not allowed to participate in any way in any kind of party politics or make contributions to any party politics. That person runs the elections and runs the voter registration system. So if you go to Dallas, you go to Fort Worth, you go to San Antonio, you go to Austin, there is a professional voter administrator there, elections administrator in those counties. We have not adopted that system. We still have the same system where the county clerk runs the elections, the tax assessor collector does the voter registration. We still have that system. But we could change. You don't want to? Okay, we've gone over that. We've gone over that. One of the things when you're registering that you should ask is, are you a federal or state judge? Chances are they're probably already registered, but you should ask that. They can have their address withheld from the voter registration list. The agent for application. Let me just say this about the agent for application. And this was kind of glossed over when the training was done. What kind of permission of the voter do you have to get in order to allow the agent to act as the agent to do the voter registration? Because that agent can fill out the form, can sign the person's name, can deliver the form, can do everything that the voter can do, but they can do it as their agent if they're a parent or they're a spouse or a child of the voter. The permission that you have to give can be in writing or it can be oral. Can be in writing or it can be oral. And as far as you as the voter registrar is concerned, if somebody comes to you and says, I want to sign my wife up, ask them, did your wife give you permission to do that? And he says, yes, affirmatively, then go ahead and sign him up. If he says, well, I know she would if I asked her, not good enough. The renewal certificate, the thing I was talking about a while ago, when that goes out, it's supposed to go out between November 15th and December 6th of each year. It's effective January 1st of the following year. So when it's sent out, hopefully everybody's updated their voter registration applications and everything like that. We just went through an election. All that should have been updated for people who actively vote. We will still get a lot of people, cards come back. And like I said, if we get them back, we'll send out the confirmation notice. The confirmation notice procedure is found in Chapter 15, Subchapter C. I think I've described it to you. The statement of residence, that's the form that's filled out when you go to vote. And you say you're on the suspense list. Fill out the statement of residence, you can vote a regular ballot. These are all the methods you can get off the suspense list. Yes, sir.
Concerning the suspense list issue, if a person that's on the list requests an application to vote by mail, does the county go ahead and send them a ballot and it has a statement of residence form with it, or are they not sent the ballot because they have to do a statement of residence first?
I believe that they send them the statement of residence form with the ballot by mail. The question is, what if somebody's on the suspense list and they request a ballot by mail? I believe that they have to return a statement of residence at the same time that they return their ballot. All right. You can get off the suspense list by updating through your driver's license bureau, by sending in a new voter registration application, coming to a voter registrar like yourselves and filling out a renewal certificate or change certificate. All those methods are valid methods. If you go online and get the form, you have to print the form out, sign the form, and mail it in. It has to be received in a timely manner. So the simplest thing to do might be just to go vote and fill out the SOR. But you cannot go online and update. If you're not on the suspense list, you can go online and update on the Secretary of State's website, but you can't do that if you are on the suspense list. We're going to try and get that law changed so that you can update both ways because, as I think I've said, it seems to me like the people that are on the suspense list are the ones that are more likely to want to use that particular method. Okay. Cancellation of registration. That's found in Chapter 16 of the Texas Election Code. You can be canceled if you do not respond to a suspense a confirmation notice within the time limit, going through 2 election cycles without going to vote or updating your information in any way. You can be canceled by that procedure I described. If we get the information to send you the cancellation notice, you have 30 days to respond. You have a right to a hearing in order to present whatever evidence that you want to present in order to support your claim that you are not to be canceled. One of the things I wanted to cover in all this is the individual challenge. I think this is what you were talking about a while ago. Recently we had an individual challenge filed against, I think the number was over 4,000 different names, people that the challenger claimed were not registered at the address. They didn't actually have residence at the address where they were registered. That they were registered at post office boxes and different places that were government buildings and churches and things like that. In order to do an individual challenge, in order to do that, you must file an affidavit with the voter registrar based on your personal knowledge that the person you're complaining about, the voter you're complaining about, is not qualified to be a voter. And you must specify the basis for your challenge, and you yourself must also be a registered voter. So a registered voter can file a complaint saying this other person is not a registered voter, is not qualified to be a registered voter. You can do so by filing the affidavit based on personal knowledge. Yes?
And if the affidavit is faulty, as the one that was filed recently was because it wasn't based on personal knowledge, right? What does that do to that process?
Okay, the question is, what if the affidavit does not demonstrate that it is based on the personal knowledge of the complainant? When the voter registrar receives a complaint, it should be reviewed to ascertain that it is in fact based on the personal knowledge of the complainant. If the affidavit does not establish that, then the registrar can reject the challenge. Can just say, this is not a valid challenge, I'm not going to engage in the process. That's the correct procedure. If the registrar, upon reviewing the affidavit, determines that it does purport to be based on the knowledge, the personal knowledge of the challenger, then we go through this process. If it's on any other basis except for residence, the challenge is served on the voter whose registration is being challenged. It specifies the basis upon which the challenge is being made. It gives the opportunity for a hearing. A hearing is to be scheduled within 20 days of the date of the notice, unless either the challenger or the person being challenged asks for a later date. When the hearing is held, the voter registrar hears the evidence being offered by either the challenger or the person being challenged, considers that evidence and the argument that's being presented to her, and makes a determination whether the challenge is good or not good. And at that point, can either cancel or refuse to cancel the registration. That's the process. If it's based on residency, then we go through the confirmation process. A letter is sent to the voter. They're given 30 days to respond to update. If they don't respond within 30 days, they're put on the suspense list, and they go through the process that way. And of course, if you get put on the suspense list, you can cure that by merely contacting the voter registrar and confirming that is your address, or correcting your information to whatever the correct address is. Now, if the voter registrar determines that the challenge is good and issues an order canceling the voter registration, then it's effective 31 days after the order of cancellation. And the reason they give you 30 days, during which time your voter registration remains in effect, during that period of time, you can go to the courts. You can go to the district court, file, and ask for a judicial review of the cancellation. That hearing is to be basically a de novo hearing. The court is to proceed like any other controversy, hear all the evidence, and make a determination based on the evidence as to whether that voter registration should be canceled or not canceled. So you go through the whole process at district court. Once you're through at district court, that's it. There's no appeal from district court to any other forum in order to consider whether a voter registration should be canceled or not canceled. But you do have that opportunity for judicial review. All right. That's about the end of what I wanted to show you, to tell you the truth. And it can be a little bit of a complicated process. It has multi-levels. The voter registration system is run by the Secretary of State's office. The people that enter the records down here and process them at the county level upload those on a periodic basis to the state to correct their list. The information flows down from the Secretary of State's office that they've gotten from other sources to correct our list. And what we try and do is make sure that that list is coordinated with the list that the Secretary of State's office has. Many of you may have heard about cybersecurity problems. I can assure you, because I also represent the county clerk and how they run the election, that those problems, those potential risks, basically exist for the voter registration system rather than for the voting system itself. When we vote, we load programs into voting machines. The programs are not connected to the internet. The machines are not connected to the internet. They're carried by hand to the polling places where they're set up and run during that election. Those machines, the voting machines themselves, are not connected to the internet. After the election is complete, then the judges take them to a gathering point where the information on the machines is downloaded into a computer that's not connected to the internet, and that is communicated by secure telephone lines to a central machine, which is not connected to the internet, that runs a report as to what the election results are. Lots of opportunity for human error, but not for hacking. Not for hacking. So, the voter registration system, on the other hand, is open to the internet on several different fronts. And what they try to do is make sure that they save on a daily basis the complete voter registration list so that if some hacking takes place, they have a very recent starting point to go back to compare to make sure that the list is complete. And they check it constantly. And they do have a lot of cybersecurity specialists that are coming out of the woodwork. They're trying to help us to make sure that our system is in fact secure. But when you hear in the news about, cyber attacks on the election system, that's really what they're talking about. Now think about this for a second. That information that's on your voter registration list, that could be very valuable to somebody that wants to steal your identity, because it has your name, it has your address, it has your birth date, it has your social security number and your driver's license. All that stuff is in the system. And if somebody had all that information, that could cause you a real problem. And that actually, I think, is much more significantly at risk than somebody interfering with the voting system. But that's what we hear about on the news, and that's unfortunately what we have to live with in our modern society. So, anybody got any questions? Anything that you want to know about? Yes, ma'am.
Do the folk from the polls, the precinct judges have a list of the suspense, people on the suspense list?
Yes. The voter registrar before every election prepares a poll list, and it's not in writing anymore. We're switching over to an electronic system that the election judges can access electronically, and when they call your name up on the system, it'll show suspense or not suspense. The only suspense list that you can actually go and examine right now is if you go on to hctax.net, on the voter registration thing, you can come up with lists of registered voters on a precinct by precinct basis. But it's not sorted and it's not sortable. You can go through there and you can see some of them are indicated as being on the suspense list. So if you want to check your individual name, however, you can go to the search engine, ask for, fill in your name. It'll pop up your voter registration card, and on that electronic version that you see online, it'll say suspense if you're on the suspense list. So if you need to check it that way, you can. But when the election workers are actually running the election, when they go to check your voter registration status to make sure you're on the roll for that precinct, the names will show up as either being on suspense or not on suspense. They'll be there when they look. Yes, sir.
Doesn't pertain to voting, but are jurors rather primarily selected from the poll list?
Oh, the question is, are the jurors selected from the voter registration list? That is one of the sources of information that they use. The driver's license list is another list. So I would prefer, and I preferred this for many years, that they pass a law saying that they can't use the voter registration list for juror wheels. And that way, because there's a lot of people, you'll run into them when you do your voter registration work. They'll say, I don't want to register to vote because then I will be called to jury duty. If we could take that out, it would, I think a lot more people would register to vote, to be quite frank. But just tell those people, you know, do you have a driver's license? Because they use that list too. So you're going to get caught one way or the other. Yes, ma'am.
If someone is on the suspension list and they show up to vote, would there be any situation where they would not be able to update their statement of residence at the time?
The question is there, if somebody's on the suspense list, when they show up to vote, is there any situation where they wouldn't be allowed to vote?
Right.
If they affirmatively say, I don't live in this county anymore, I live in Fort Bend County, you could still fill out the statement of residence, but you wouldn't be allowed to vote here anymore. That's actually kind of a heartbreaking thing. People, if they just showed up and just said, yes, I still live at this address, they could probably go ahead and vote. But if they actually have affirmatively moved to another county, and that's the information that they offer when they go to fill out the statement of residence, then they would not vote. They could not vote a regular ballot anyways in this county at that point. Yes, sir.
Is there any prohibition about handing out campaign literature at the same time you're registering voters?
Yes, I think that there is.
Do you know what it is?
Well, it depends if you're actually working for a state registration agency. So if you're working at the library or at one of those agencies I just mentioned, you are prohibited from promoting participation in one party or another at that time. If it's just you, you know, you're operating as a deputy volunteer voter registrar out there in the sticks, then no, I don't think there's any prohibition against that. But there is a general prohibition against intimidating voters or trying to influence voters unduly. So I think one of the questions that always comes up for me is, well, I'm a Democrat, and if somebody says they're a Republican, I'm going to refuse to register to vote. I'm not sure that you can get away with that. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any prohibition against wearing a candidate's paraphernalia while you're registering people to vote if you're not registered? Let's say if I go out to a high school, could I wear a candidate's T-shirt while I'm registering high school students?
I don't think so. As long as you're not participating as one of the voter registration agencies that's named in the state, working at the DMV or one of those other agencies, I don't think there's any prohibition against that. And that's actually quite common. You know, candidates will throw events, and one of the things that they do during their event is to register people to vote during the event. So I think you would be okay doing it that way. I heard some mention of the high school voter registration. Principals of high schools or their designee are required twice a year to distribute voter registration material to all students that are turning 18 during that year. They're supposed to do it twice a year, and they are empowered, just the same as you would be now that you're enrolled as a volunteer deputy voter registrar, or if they're an agent of the voter registrar's office, to collect that material, and they're required to collect it and deliver it to the voter registrar's office in a timely manner. The same thing, the same way that you all are. So that's a program. I know that Benny, is he still here? I know that's something that he is very strong on, that Ms. Bennett is also trying to promote to get the principals of the schools to actually fulfill their statutory duty to go out and provide that material to the students twice a year. And if you bump into a principal, if he has something like, well, you know, that's a lot of trouble for me, you know, and I have a lot of administrative duties, you ever try to run a high school, and you know, that kind of stuff, then what you can say is you can designate somebody else. Designate your government teacher. You know, if you have a student who's registered to vote, who is very active, designate her. Say, okay, Susie, you're in charge of voter registration at this high school. I think Julie's daughter did that over at Lamar High School. She was in charge of voter registration. She can be designated to do the distribution, gathering, and delivery of the material. So it's not as hard as it sounds. And it doesn't sound that hard to begin with. But anyways, that's part of the program. Anything else? Anybody else? Any other questions? Well, I know that you missed, my valuable PowerPoint presentation because of technical difficulties, but believe me, you know, it wouldn't have added that much to the experience. But if you would like, I could email it to you. If you sneak me an email, I'll send it to you. If you just feel like you need something that, your sleep aid is not working, you can look at it while you're trying to go to sleep at night, you can flip through there and you'll be out just like that. Okay.
What is your email?
My name is Douglas Ray.
No email.
Oh, my email, douglas.ray at cao.hc.net.
HCTX.
Oh, no, I said it wrong. cao.hctx.net. I said it wrong. Let me give you my phone numbers. That way, if you have any questions, you can just call me up. My office number, this is my direct line. If I happen to be sitting at my desk and you call and I see I don't recognize your number popping up there, I'll answer the phone. You don't have to go through a receptionist. It's 713-274-5163. That's 713-274-5163. And also, let me give you my cell phone number, my trusty cell phone right here. You call me, I'll answer. It's 281-935-1904. That's 281-935-1904. And I've been giving that out to election judges for many, many years, and there aren't too many of them that are so annoying that I don't like to talk to them. So they haven't abused it yet. And I guess I'm going to hand it back over to Terry.
All right, thank you. Big hand for Doug Ray.
Thank you for being here today and participating in this program.